It began with a phone call that should have meant safety, a moment that should have ended in relief but instead became the start of a nightmare that still hasn't been solved, because on the night of April 3rd, 1991, in Austin, a young mother named Heidi Broussard was abducted from her home.
Was last seen alive, and within days, she would vanish along with her newborn baby, leaving behind a mystery so disturbing
that when the truth finally began to surface, it revealed something far more chilling than anyone had imagined. So stay with me. Deception, and a twist so dark that it will completely change the way you see the truth. You look at the people closest to you. Heidi was 23 years old, a loving mother, and by all accounts, someone who was deeply connected
to her family and friends. She had just given birth to her daughter, a moment that should have marked the beginning
of a new chapter filled with joy, but instead, it became the last known point of normalcy before everything unraveled. The day she disappeared started like any other. Routine, predictable, nothing out of place. She was seen by people who knew her, interacting normally, showing no signs of distress, no indication that anything was wrong. But then, suddenly, she was gone.
No struggle, no clear evidence, just absence. And when her family realized something wasn't right, panic set in almost immediately.
Calls were made, searches began, and the question on everyone's mind was simple but terrifying. Where did she go? As investigators began piecing together the timeline, they quickly realized that this wasn't a simple case of someone leaving voluntarily. Heidi had no reason to disappear. She had just had a baby, she had responsibilities, connections, a life that didn't suggest she would walk away.
And then there was the newborn, a child who depended on her completely, which made the situation even more urgent.
Because now it wasn't just about one missing person, it was about two, and that raises the stakes in a way that changes everything. The longer they remained missing, the more dangerous the situation became. Days passed, leads were followed, tips came in, but nothing solid. But nothing concrete emerged, until something unexpected happened. Something that shifted the entire direction of the case.
Hundreds of miles away, in Houston, a woman was found with a baby, claiming it was hers. And at first, nothing seemed unusual.
But as authorities looked closer, inconsistencies began to appear. The timeline didn't match, the details didn't align, and what started as a routine check quickly turned into something far more serious. Because that baby, the one she claimed as her own, was identified as Heidi's missing child. And in that moment, the case took a turn that no one had fully anticipated. Because if the baby was there, safe, but in someone else's custody, then where was Heidi? And more importantly,
how did the child end up with this woman? The investigation intensified. Questions were asked. Connections were examined.
And what they discovered was both shocking and deeply unsettling. The woman in Houston was not a stranger. She was someone Heidi knew. Someone who had been part of her life. Someone who had been trusted. And that single fact transforms this story from a disappearance into something far more personal, far more disturbing, because it suggests that whatever happened didn't come from outside, it came from within, from someone who had access,
who had proximity, who had the ability to move unnoticed, because they were already inside the circle of trust.
And as investigators dug deeper, the details that emerged painted a picture that was as chilling as it was complex. This wasn't a random act, it wasn't a crime of opportunity, it was something that had been building, something that involved planning, deception, and a level of manipulation that is difficult to comprehend. Because to carry out something like this requires not just intent,
but patience, the ability to maintain appearances, to interact normally while hiding something much darker beneath the surface.
And that's what makes this case so unsettling, because it forces you to consider the possibility that the people we trust the most can sometimes be the ones we understand the least. The theories surrounding this case initially ranged from abduction to voluntary disappearance. But as evidence mounted, one possibility became more dominant: that Heidi was targeted, that her trust was exploited, and that her disappearance was directly connected to someone she knew. And that leads to the most disturbing question of all. What could drive someone to commit such an act? To take a child, to remove a mother from the picture,
to create a situation where one life is preserved while another is erased. And that's where the psychological aspect of this case
becomes impossible to ignore, because it suggests motive rooted not in impulse, but in desire. in obsession, in something that had been growing long before the crime itself. And as the investigation progressed, the pieces began to align. The timelines matched, the connections became clearer, and the reality of what had happened started to come into focus.
But even as answers began to emerge, the story didn't lose its impact. Because the truth, when it finally started to surface,
It was not just about what happened, but about how it happened. About the trust that was broken, the manipulation that was carried out, and the realization that the danger had been closer than anyone realized. And even now, as you think about this case, how easily something like this can unfold through routine interactions and familiar faces. What do you want to explore? Can hide something far more complex beneath the surface. Because in the end, this isn't just a story about disappearance.
it's a story about perception, about how we interpret the people around us, and about the moments where that interpretation fails.
Leading to consequences that are both tragic and irreversible. And as we reach the end of this story, one question remains. The same question that has lingered since the moment Heidi Broussard was last seen. What truly happened in the space between? Somewhere in that gap lies the full truth, and we're gonna find it. The deeper reality of how something so unimaginable
Could happen in plain sight, and until every detail is fully uncovered, this case will continue to stand as a chilling reminder.
that sometimes the most dangerous threats are not the ones we fear, but the ones we trust. But what do you want to explore? They are watching, closest, waiting, and hiding right in front of us.